Everyone. My name is Julie Spear, and on behalf of the whole A.T. Still University Teaching and Learning Center team, I'd like to welcome those of you in the Zoom room and those watching the recording to today's session. Reading assignments don't have to be retro. This is the first of three presentations in the series, Fantastic Fits, Pairing Ed Tech with Impactful Learning Activities. Before we dive in, I want to ground this presentation in two foundational theories. The first is the Task Technology Fit Model, or TTF. Goodhue and Thompson wrote about this model in 1995. And at its core, the TTF proposes that a person will only utilize a specific technology tool if the task aligns with the tool's functionality. The second grounding theory for this session is the Technology Acceptance Model, or TAM, established by Davis in 1989. The TAM suggests that the perceived ease of use and usefulness of a tool influence how people feel about the tool, their intentions to use it, and ultimately whether they use it or not. You can read more about these two technology theories in the article that we'll share in the chat and through YouTube. But for now, taking these two theories together, we can really see why it can be so important to find the right tool for the task. Through this series, we will highlight how technology tools can be selected and used intentionally to support several common teaching tasks. In today's presentation, we'll specifically talk about pairing educational technology and readings to make them more engaging and inclusive. I want you to think back to when you were in school, particularly graduate school, if applicable. What comes to mind when you think about reading assignments? How did you feel when you were assigned a reading? How seriously did you take the task? I'll pause for a moment for everyone to think. Readings are a common source of content in all disciplines across education. They can be incredibly useful and they have a lot of value, but they can also have more than a few challenges. Learning is inherently a social process, but readings are often conducted in isolation by each student on their own. Readings are often used as decontextualized prep work, so students may not feel motivated to engage with the material deeply. And this is especially true if they know the information will be repeated in class later through lecture, or if there's no accountability for them to complete the assignment. Some students take readings very seriously, but they don't always know what the most important things to focus on are. This can manifest in students just skimming the text, or students transcribing or highlighting the whole chapter and not really internalizing it. And while everything else has been a stock photo, I should point out this isn't. This is an actual picture of my notes from graduate school. And here the text is teeny, teeny, tiny. And I remember it taking me hours to transcribe these notes. I remember trying to focus on the most important aspects of each topic. But I also remember being scared about missing something. And I think that's how you end up with an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper completely covered front and back. Reading tasks can be easier for some students than others. And students might have questions while they're reading, but there may not be a great way for them to ask that question in the moment. Lastly, while some students enjoy reading to learn content, others may prefer to engage with content in other ways, like listening to material. Other students may not feel confident in that content until they're able to apply ideas more hands-on or do something to check their understanding. So while I absolutely believe that readings have an important place in higher education, there are some ways that we can use technology to specifically address these challenges. While we won't cover an exhaustive list of tools to do this, in our time today, I will explore 3 case studies that look at how technology can enhance readings. As we cover these ideas, I'll specifically highlight how they can be used to support learning in in-person, synchronous online, and asynchronous classes. For our first example, let's look at an in-person course with a class session related to burn care. Before finding a fantastic fit with technology, I might have assigned students to all read the same journal article and come to class prepared for an in-person discussion. And this isn't wrong. Discussion-based activities can be fantastic. But in this scenario, people may read the article on their own from a decontextualized and neutral standpoint, with limited engagement and without knowing what the most important thing they should focus on as they read. They might even forget about what they read by the time they get to class. Or worse yet, they might not have read the article because there wasn't anything holding them accountable for preparing for that in-person discussion. So for those of you in the Zoom room, can I ask for a quick show of hands? How many times have you seen something like this as a student or as an instructor? Something being assigned to students to read before coming to class with limited accountability to do so. Yeah, I'm seeing some hands. And when this happens, it de-emphasizes the value of the reading and certainly impacts the robustness of the in-class discussion. So we might enhance this reading using the PDF annotation tool in Harmonize. You might already be using Harmonize discussion boards, and in a few weeks, in Erin's presentation, we'll hear more about how Harmonize can be used to support asynchronous discussions, specifically for case studies. But you may not all know that Harmonize also has a social annotation option. What's great about this tool is that we have access to it at no additional cost here at ATSU, and it can be used right within Canvas. Even more importantly, I can use this tool to directly address some of the challenges of a traditional reading assignment, including isolation, decontextualization, limited engagement, accountability, and ambiguity. Using the Harmonized PDF annotation tool, I may break the class into groups to read the article and give them specific context for the task, like asking members of each group to read the article by taking on a particular perspective or persona, like patient, caregiver, or practitioner, or maybe optimist and skeptic. Now, as students read the article, they're doing so in a social context and they're clued in to look for particular things. They can take notes in the article as they read about what they notice from their assigned vantage point, and these notes would be visible to them and their group mates. By asking students to contribute a minimum number of comments and reply to a certain number of their peers' posts, we can set clear expectations, support engagement with the text, and foster a sense of accountability. And as the instructor, I can also annotate elements of the article to indicate areas where I really want students to focus, or I can ask food for thought questions, add context for something that might be confusing, or indicate that something's more nice to know than need to know. In this process, our reading goes from students passively reading an article to engaging more deeply with the content and each other during the reading. Then in class, we can have a more robust discussion, and we can leverage these viewpoints as we consider a case example or engage in something like a role-playing scenario. Now, this reading didn't just become something students had to do on their own in class. Instead, it felt more social. They could see other people reading the article, and that could help them feel connected and so that they could learn from their peers' thoughts as they read the article. Now, students are actually prepared to engage with complex ideas. They have an increased sense of accountability because they know what they need to do to come to class prepared. The notes that they took are available in the document so they can refer back to them as a resource during the discussion or reflect on them over time. And now this assignment better aligns with the ATSU core professional attributes of critical thinking, empathy, and interpersonal skills by encouraging students to think about the content and the data from real lived perspectives. I want to highlight that this approach is easily adaptable to other reading tasks and other instructional formats. For example, I could assign all the students to the same article so they can learn from a broader range of perspectives, or I could have different groups of students read different articles. You can encourage students to share external resources in their comments or practice with concepts to kind of have a combination reading discussion board. Or rather than asking students to do a certain number of comments, you might instead use the annotations as an optional way for students to leave you confusion flags or ask questions so you know what concepts would be most impactful for you to review in class. And this tool could certainly work just as well for synchronous online and asynchronous courses too. Also, while I've highlighted the Harmonized PDF annotation tool here today, there are other social annotation tools that can be fantastic fits for your reading assignments, like Perusall and Hypothesis. Each of these tools have their own pros and cons and use cases, so remember to consider your specific task when finding your fantastic fit. As we've briefly discussed, reading tasks can be easier for some students than others, and this is particularly true for students with dyslexia, ADHD, low vision, and students for whom English is not their first language, and this really relates to matters of equity. To see how technology can address this challenge of reading assignments, let's now picture a synchronous online class related to healthcare administration. First, let's say that during the class, I asked students to complete an activity in breakout rooms with written instructions in a Google Doc that's been shared with students through the Zoom chat. I'm going to click play here and we'll look at this document together. I'm going to look at my other monitor to narrate what's happening in the video. So here we have a document. There's background and formulas. There's tables and steps to follow. Another example with more data tables, more steps, and then there's resources at the very end. So for those of you in the Zoom room today, quick show of hands again. How many of you can relate to the idea of sharing a document with students in class, a document like this, and either watching people's attention drift away or asking students to go to breakout rooms and worrying about whether they're going to stay on track and productive? Yeah, I'm seeing some hands. This is a real challenge and one that we can again look at through the lens of technology. This document that I shared has proper heading structures. It uses high contrast fonts. It uses tables for data appropriately, and it has lists that are properly formatted. So from an accessibility perspective, there's a lot going on that's good here. But before finding a fantastic fit with EdTech, some students still might find it especially hard to stay focused on the task at hand because there is a lot going on in this document. In this case, students might benefit from a Chrome extension called Visor. Chrome extensions are third-party tools that you can enable within your own web browser. This tool in particular, Visor, creates a screen dimmer with a point of focus overlay, which is a horizontal bar that can be moved with the cursor on the screen. So we'll take a look. So here I can go ahead and turn the tool on. I can adjust the color of the overlay. I can change the opacity. And I can change the size of that bar, that focus area. And as I move my cursor around or scroll on the page, that focus area moves with me. The great thing is that you can still interact with the underlying web page. So here I can still type in Google Docs, or I could still click on links in a web page. And this can be turned on or off as needed to help individuals. Now let's say in the same class, after finishing case example 2, I've asked students to go to one of the web pages linked from the bottom of the Google Doc. On screen, I'm showing one of the resources that was linked, and this is a cost effectiveness analysis page from the US Department of Veterans Affairs. There's a lot of great information here, but there are 3 different panels of text. So while a student could continue to use Visor on this page to help them focus on a horizontal region, another student might benefit from other assistive technologies. In particular, they might benefit from a tool called Reading Mode in Chrome. Reading Mode is a tool built right into the Chrome browser that can be accessed by right-clicking on a web page and clicking Open in Reading Mode. That it comes up in the menu that appears. Let's take a look at this in action. So here I'm going to open this web page in Reading Mode, and I'm going to highlight a chunk of text. And here someone could play the audio.
What is cost effectiveness analysis?
They can change the speed of the audio.
Cost effectiveness analysis is a tool
The voice.
Used to aid decisions about
which medical care should.
They can also change how text is highlighted. So they can turn highlighting off. They can use something called adaptive highlighting, or they can highlight the word or sentence as it's being read.
Be offered. It is a method of comparing the cost and effectiveness of 2 or more alternatives. Such comparisons are useful when one of the alternatives being considered is.
And the audio can be played or paused as needed. Users can also change the size of the font, bigger or smaller. They can change the font itself. They can change contrast modes, so we can use high contrast or low contrast, light or dark mode, or change the color background to yellow or blue for focus, for example. Users can also change the spacing between the lines and the words. And this is adaptive. So as new text is highlighted, the reading mode will update. So here I'm going to highlight this table of contents on the page. And in reading mode, we can still click on those links. And in this case, it's moving us around the document. The links can also be disabled to better focus on the words that are being said in the actual links or to help with that audio being read. Now, because of this technology, unnecessary barriers to engaging with readings were reduced. Students could use the tools and features they needed individually to customize the reading content for themselves. And this can allow students to be more engaged and participatory in class. Here I highlighted an example for a synchronous online class, but these Chrome-based tools are just as applicable for in-person or asynchronous courses where readings are also being used. I should also note that there are numerous other plugins and tools out there. I really liked Reading Mode because it's built into the Chrome browser already and therefore didn't require any additional tools. And I liked Visor because they state that they don't use any of your data. But anytime that you're considering web browser extensions or plugins, please remember that these are third-party tools and you should do your due diligence to check what, if any, access you'd be giving the tool to your account and your data. So for our last example, we're going to look now at an asynchronous dental public health class. In this class, like in our first example, before finding a fantastic fit with technology, I might assign students to read a dense technical report before engaging with an online discussion board. I might remind students that I'm available to answer their questions via email or office hours as part of the weekly module. But I'll do a quick poll of the Zoom room. Show of hands, how many of you think I might get more than 1 or 2 questions via email or 1 or 2 takers on office hours? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. So it's important to offer this support to learners. But the reality is that while students may have questions while they read or skim the article, students may be unable to come to office hours. They might feel like their question isn't important enough to email you about, or they might have a question while reading that they ignore and move on from. Another challenge here is that students have different preferences for how they engage with content. Some students might prefer to read the material, but others might have preferences for alternative formats. So let's again see how technology can help us address the challenges of confusion and preference here. A fantastic fit for this challenge is Google's Notebook LM. Notebook LM is a Google product that leverages AI to allow users to load in sources and reference materials into what's called a notebook, and then they and anyone they share the notebook with can use the chat feature to ask questions, or they can use the Studio panel to get AI-generated resources based on only the materials that were included in the notebook. And this is really what distinguishes Notebook LM from other chatbots like ChatGPT or Gemini's main chatbot. While questions asked to those chatbots are informed by vast swaths of training data, here in Notebook LM, the AI has been trained, but is answering questions and building resources specifically informed by the sources that you've included in your notebook. This tool is available for free to ATSU educators. Just make sure that you're logged into your Google account with your ATSU credentials. So with this technology, students can be tasked with reading the technical report. However, now I might create a notebook where the report has been uploaded as the source material and share that notebook with students. Again, I would certainly answer questions via email and still hold my office hours. But in this case, I might invite students to use the notebook as a tool if they have questions as they're reading or would benefit from additional resources as they read. So let's take a look. And again, I'll look at my other monitor for just a moment here. So here's the technical report. This is a WHO report about dental practice. And as a student was reading, they might have questions about the content and go over to the notebook. So here they might ask a question like, what are recommendations for pediatric patients? And the AI is going to return an answer. And specifically, they'll indicate these sources. So here, when you hover over one of these citations, you can see where information it was pulling from to inform that answer. And this is really helpful because then students can go back and review that content in context, and they can check for hallucinations. So here it's saying that this answer came from chapter 4, and a student could go back into chapter 4 and look up that information. There's other resources we talked about, that Studio panel. And so here I've already generated an audio overview, which is a bit like a podcast. So we'll take a listen.
Picture this. You're sitting in the dental chair, tipped entirely too far back.
Oh, yeah.
And you're staring up at that impossibly bright circular light. And then you hear it, that high-pitched, what exactly is going into your teeth?
Honestly, it's a question most of us actively try to avoid thinking about while we're trapped in that chair. I mean, we just want the cavity fixed.
That gives you a little bit of a sense of that audio overview. It's kind of podcast in more of an informal tone. We can also use the Studio to generate things like infographics. So here, this is an oral health care roadmap that was generated by the AI. And we can also have the AI generate quizzes about the material. So here, students could get hints if they needed. And as they answer the question, they'll get immediate feedback. So they'll see what the right answer was and why the other answers were incorrect. They can also use the option at the very bottom to have the AI explain the concepts in the question. So as with any AI tool, it's incredibly important that students engage with the content brains on, meaning that they're vetting the content and thinking critically. Even though this tool is generating content informed by the sources that we provided, there can still be hallucinations and glitches. For example, you may have caught that glitch in the podcast episode where one person's sentence was completely cut off. So this is not perfect, but it is a resource that we can provide to students. Now students might have a mechanism to get their questions answered when and where they're doing the reading. This might help students feel more comfortable to ask a question without fearing looking silly or stupid in front of their instructor or colleagues. And when used intentionally, it might actually encourage students to pause and ask those questions rather than wondering about something and forging on with the reading. In this process, students might be encouraged to engage more deeply in the task and think more critically in the moment. The additional resources here in the tool, like the podcast, infographic, and quizzes, don't mean that students should skip reading the article. They can absolutely still be tasked with reading the article and be held accountable for learning that content. But these features can provide additional resources for students to engage with the material in different ways and check their understanding before proceeding. Dr. Susan Thomas, instructional designer and adjunct faculty in the College of Graduate Health Studies, has been using Notebook LM to support her learners. We'll share a link to a full video that Susan recorded about Notebook LM, but in this session, I wanted to share a quote that I think really highlights what we've been talking about here today. Susan said, "Notebook LM doesn't just replace the reading. It lowers the barrier to entry so students can actually do the high-level critical thinking that we ask of them." So this is certainly not the only way that Notebook LM could be used. Other material types could be incorporated into the notebook to support students, like your syllabus, or we could include multiple course materials so that students can generate quizzes and flashcards to check their understanding and progress formatively ahead of assessments. And of course, this is not only applicable for asynchronous courses, but this could be available for in-person and synchronous online courses as well. So as we wrap up here today, I want to restate that reading assignments can be valuable tools in the learning experience. And through intentionally using technology, we can address some of the challenges of traditional readings to elevate them and support student-centered instruction. Using tools like harmonized PDF annotations, we can turn isolating, decontextualized readings with low engagement and accountability into assignments that leverage collaboration, are focused and grounded, that are interactive and have clear expectations. Tools in the web browser can help support equity and inclusion for our reading assignments. And Notebook LM can help students get support on demand and engage with different resources in accordance with their preferences as they're reading. Readings have been a foundational tool in education, and I really believe that they remain so. But I encourage us to reflect on what readings can be instead of what they have looked like. And to that end, I'd like you to each take a moment to reflect on an idea that this session has generated for you about ways you might enhance readings in your classes, or ways that you've done this using tools beyond the ones that we've talked about here today. Throughout today's session, we've shared resources about the tools in the chat, and we'll make these available through YouTube as well. But I want to leave you with more general resources about the TLC too. Please explore our website to learn more about the TLC at ATSU, and we invite you to connect with us via email or schedule a consultation to talk more about finding your fantastic fits with educational technology or to discuss other teaching and learning topics. Whether you are here live in Zoom today or you're watching this recording on YouTube, excuse me, I want to thank you so much for your time and attention and for being part of this TLC seminar series. We hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation, and we hope you'll also join us for the upcoming sessions in the seminar series. Recordings from these and other sessions are available in the TLC Learning channel. We hope to see you soon, and thank you so much for being here today.